Well, good morning, guys. Good to see everybody. I appreciate you braving out the rain this morning. I don't know if it was just one of those mornings for you where you kind of opened one eye and heard the pitter patter of the rain and thought, "Nah, I'm going back to sleep," and you came on anyway. So I'm really glad for that. We are in Genesis 18 today. And, it's one of those things where I am just so grateful every time I'm here on Wednesday morning. And you guys have been so good to encourage me and tell me that there's some fruitfulness to our study. And I'll just tell you, man, I mean, this is, for me, it's rich. It is, when I sit down to prepare each week, I'm wondering, what's this next chapter going to be like? Is it going to be nearly as good as this last one? And every single week, I'm just kind of like, yeah. I mean, this is rich. This is just so good. So I'm glad there's been some fruit in your life from this. There's certainly a lot of fruit in my life, and a lot of things that I learn every week. So some of these things that I share with you. It's not like I've been sitting on this, in great spiritual wisdom for a long time. Man, I just learned it last week too, a lot of times. But it's just really good stuff. All right, so let's give our cooks a big hand this morning. And just a reminder, in case you miss, and if you want to catch up, each time that I teach, it's recorded. And it's on Dr. Pepper and Friends podcast. So if you go to YouTube or Apple or Spotify, it's on any of those. We have a Men of Fellowship Facebook page. And if you haven't become a part of that, you're welcome to do that. We don't really post much on there other than sometimes there'll be a comment or two. But most of the time it's just, okay, the lesson from this morning dropped and you're welcome to grab it. But if you ever have a prayer request or something like that, there are guys that get notifications when there's a post on that. So feel free to participate in that. And if you go to the YouTube channel, there's the dark red logos that are there. Those are the teaching ones. And then that also doubles as podcasts for counseling episodes too. And you're welcome to watch those or listen to those. But that's the Dr. Pepper and Friends if you want to catch the recording or catch up. I think I've got all of them on there from the very first one back in the fall. So anyway, are you enjoying Genesis? This has been so good. So we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to take a look at chapter 18, but I want to read kind of a bigger section of it at one time, and then we'll kind of come back and do some of the verse by verse with that. In chapter 18, let's look at the first few verses, and we'll read down through verse 8, and then we'll come back and break that down, okay? So the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre. We'll come back to that. And at the door of his tent in the heat of the day, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him, and when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, "O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and that after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham quickly went into the tent and said, "Quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it, and make cakes." And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf that was tender and good, and he gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. And then he took curds and milk and a calf that he had prepared, and he set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. So let's kind of cover that much. So in chapter 17 last week, we saw where God revealed himself as El Shaddai. Okay, and what did El Shaddai mean? What was that? Yeah, God Almighty, but there's a little bit more nuance. There's another kind of descriptive term there. That he was all-sufficient, okay? That he was not just powerful, but he was all-sufficient. Remember, we talked about how everybody kind of all the way through Genesis 1 through 15, when given the opportunity to take what God offered them, they were choosing plan B instead. So God reintroduces himself to Abraham after 13 years and reintroduces himself as El Shaddai, which is just kind of the all-sufficient one. Right, so this is the kind of the reintroduction. And then he changed Abram's name to Abraham. and promised him a son. And Abraham says that he obeyed him that very day. Now, as we step into chapter 18, what Abraham is about to learn is that the God of the covenant is also the God who visits, okay? So let's kind of dig into this kind of in the verse by verse. And the first part kind of starts this off that the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, okay? Now, where have we heard that before? The oaks of Mamre. Say that again? Yeah, so Genesis 13. And what did Abraham do at the oaks of Mamre? Do you remember? This is the first time that we know of that he did this. He worshiped, okay? So he had the covenant promised, and he worshiped at the oaks of Mamre. And in doing so, this was just something that kind of became a holy place for him. Right, so here, and it's you notice kind of the simplicity of God showing up here. Okay, Abraham's not on a mountain praying. Okay, he's sitting in the shade, probably half asleep. Okay, in the heat of the day, just kind of in an ordinary everyday afternoon, and then the Lord appears. Okay, so the translation literally was Yahweh was seen by him. Okay, so not El Shaddai, but Yahweh was seen by him. And this is kind of a more literal translation. And this isn't a dream. I mean, this is a visible encounter. Okay, so when you think about a visible encounter, there's a word for that. You remember what that word was? When somebody visibly sees God. Yeah, so it was the word theophany. Okay, we got our theology going now. All right, so now check this out. If it's a theophany when you see God, okay, there's another term that I want us to consider, because a lot of scholars, okay, John Piper, Dr. Constable, D.A. Carson, what these scholars all agree on in this moment, this wasn't just a theophany, this may have been a Christophany, okay? This may have been like the pre-incarnate Christ visiting in kind of in the appearance of a man just hanging out with Abraham underneath a shade tree. Okay, so before Bethlehem, Jesus may at times have stepped into human history like this, walking, talking, being with people, maybe even sometimes intervening. So can you think of another time in the Old Testament where that may have happened? Where? Hagar. Okay, yeah. Hagar, you are the God who sees. There's another one I'm thinking of, yeah. Jacob, okay, with the wrestling match. Okay, yeah. Any others? Yeah, that's the one I was thinking about. As the fiery furnace, is that possibly, when Daniel and it was thrown in, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were, all three of them? Yeah, all four of them. Yeah, they were in the fiery furnace, or is that right? Yeah, and there was a fourth person, that appeared as the Son of God, I think is the way that's worded. So maybe Genesis 18 gives us kind of an early glimpse of Emmanuel, who, God with us. We may have an early glimpse of this. All right? Verse 2. Somebody say something? Okay, verse 2. So he lifted up his eyes and he looked, and behold, these three men were standing in front of him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. Okay? So Abraham is 99 years old, and he's bolting, right? He's running. Okay? We see him running at 99 years old to meet the guests that had arrived here. And if we're looking at culture, the thing that we see is that patriarchs didn't run. Servants did, but patriarchs didn't run. But yet, Abraham kind of sprints toward these people who were strangers. And there's a humility to this, and maybe even a discernment to this, because what we're going to see in a second, this is not going to be the last time that we see Abraham run. We saw that even in these verses. So the Bible Project reminds us that Abraham's hospitality here really becomes a model for Israel in being able to welcome visitors. Because from that point forward in culture, in Israelite culture, the idea was that you just never know that you may have God coming to visit your tent and sit at your table, right? So that was something that became kind of a custom. And we see this show up again in Hebrews 13:2. Okay, it says, it talks about, perhaps you're entertaining angels unawares. Okay, is what Hebrews 13:2 says. So you just never know, who on the street that you may be, stopping and talking to, or who in your neighborhood you may be stopping and talking to, or who may show up at your house. Verse 3. So, O Lord, if I found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant, but let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. Okay. Now, I want to kind of give you a little hint here. So introverts, you're not going to understand this, okay? Because introverts, you kind of take in hard data most of the time, okay? But extroverts know this, okay? And that is, as we are talking sometimes, we're assessing the situation, okay? We're kind of figuring out and trying to discern what's going on that's not being spoken in this conversation. So you get this idea, or you get this scene where Abraham has guests, okay? So he doesn't know anything about these guests. Maybe guests were few and far between in those days, but Abraham runs to meet them. And what's the first thing that he does? Yeah, he bows down before them, and Abraham's maybe kind of assessing the situation as he's bowing down before them. And then Abraham starts talking, and introverts, this is the part that may be hard for you to understand, because you would never say anything unless you thought about it before, okay? Us extroverts, you know what we do? We start running our mouth, and we don't have any idea where we're going with it, okay? We just start talking, and it kind of comes to us as we're talking. And I think this is what Abraham's doing. Hey, how you doing? Let me get you a snack. We're going to get some water. And he's kind of assessing the situation, okay? Because you're going to see in just a second, it goes from a snack to this full-blown feast, right? And something in this interaction that he's having is something that he discerns that these guests are different. And maybe it's just the presence of God himself that's inviting him in deeper, and Abraham may not even understand why it is that he's experiencing this in the way that he is, but at first he kind of throws out this invitation for a snack, and what they say to him there's, do as you have said. Okay, but Abraham calls one of them Lord, and if you look at the language here, this is a singular expression. He's not talking about sirs. He's not saying, hey, sirs, gentlemen. He's noticing that one of them stands out, okay, and he's calling one of them Lord. So his spidey senses have already gone off because one of them is different. So he offers them this snack, just the basics, just water, bread, shade. But you notice as he's talking, his urgency picks up, okay? Francis Chan said that God loves to show his power through simple acts of obedience. And sometimes when we just engage with simple acts of obedience, sometimes a holy moment begins to occur. Sometimes just basic hospitality, offering someone a drink of water, whatever that may be, it becomes kind of a doorway to more of a holy encounter and something that's a God moment in our lives. So think about, I don't know if maybe this is your house, but I know I had a friend that I used to go to his house every now and then, and his children were really trained, that as soon as a guest came to the door, whichever child, and I had many of his different children answer the door, but as soon as a guest came to the door, hey, how are you doing, sir? Can I get you something to eat or drink? I mean, every single time that was the first thing out of their mouth, right? And there's just a simple hospitality to that that kind of leaves somebody feeling welcome and draws them in even more. All right, verse 6. So Abraham went quickly into the tent and went to Sarah, and he said, quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it and make cakes. And this is where it changes, okay? Then, all right, so because so far, I mean, he promised them bread and water, okay? So he's asking her to maybe to make some bread. But then I think the seahs, 3 seahs was equal to like 20 pounds, Okay, so something changed from the time that he left their presence to the time that he gets in with Sarah. He's like, something else is going on here. Okay, let's get out 20 pounds of flour. Okay, this is not just a little snack anymore. And then it says that he ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. And he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared, and he set it before them. And then he stood by them under the tree, and he watched them eat. Okay, that may have been a little creepy. I don't know. But you kind of can picture this commotion, right? Sarah is kneading dough. Servants are scrambling. Abraham is barking orders to servants, and he's pacing around maybe like a proud host. And then here we go again with Abraham running. Okay, now guys, this is the best dad joke. I couldn't wait for this one. Okay, this is our first example of DoorDash. Yeah, this is our first example of DoorDash. So he said, he says quickly prepare this meal, and just because he said quickly doesn't mean that this all happened quickly. This was probably something that took a bit. Okay, I mean, when you think about like all that was going on, it may have taken like up to 6 hours, 4 to 6 hours, grinding and kneading, about all this flour, slaughtering and then roasting a young calf. Heating up the clay oven, I guess they may have had, setting the table, getting the fresh milk, the curds, all of that kind of stuff. It took a minute, okay? It wasn't just something that, it was a snack that he kind of put in a microwave. I mean, this was a full-scale feast that was kind of a day's work of hospitality that was taking place. So somehow he sensed and discerned that these strangers didn't want to just kind of rest their legs for a minute, but they were there for a visit. Right? He kind of figured that out. And at some point, maybe just decided there's nothing that's too much when God shows up at your tent, right? So today, if it happened today, it'd be kind of like firing up the grill and, getting out the prime rib and I don't know about a brisket, that'd take a little longer. But, making it homemade bread, pulling out the best dishes, all of those things, and then serving it to some people that really were kind of total strangers. You didn't know anything about them, but you're doing all of this for passersby, for people who were just kind of showing up. And it's not, for Abraham, it's not about showing off. It's about honoring someone that just comes to your home. He's offering his very best in this. And I think in many ways, that's kind of what real hospitality looks like. It's giving your time, it's giving your table, it's giving your heart, so people can experience the presence of God in your home, and offering what is the best, regardless of who it is or how many people there are. Just offering your best to that individual, because in many ways, the audience that you're doing that for is the Lord himself, and not just the ones that may be in front of you in some cases. And then there's this simple end to this little dialogue here, and it just says simply, they ate, right? They ate. I love this. D.A. Carson says this, that whenever God shares a meal with humans, it's a sign of restored fellowship. That whenever God shares a meal with humans, it's a sign of restored fellowship. So you remember, it had been 13 years since Abraham had heard anything from God. Probably he was in a place where he was thinking, man, I've blown this. Whatever God was doing in me, that's gone away. And then you get this word from him. He reintroduces himself as El Shaddai in this last chapter, but then he personally comes and visits. It's a sign of restored fellowship. And you think about that, and it's kind of this preview of Jesus eating with sinners. It's kind of this preview even of the Last Supper. Celebrating the Passover wasn't all that was going on in that moment, because Jesus was on the verge of really restoring fellowship between God and man on the cross the next day. It's kind of a preview even of the wedding feast of the Lamb. When we fast forward to the end, we see the next time that we're going to share that kind of communion with him is going to be at the wedding feast of the Lamb. So think about this maybe the next time we have communion. The next time we take the Lord's Supper at church, go back to the body and the blood of Jesus, and by all means do that. But also remember that was kind of a command that Jesus gave us, that anytime we eat, remember him in those things, but not just remembering him, but remember the restoration of fellowship that has taken place because of Jesus between God and man, right? So next time you have the Lord's Supper, remember that. So here in Abraham's yard, okay, God sits down to eat, okay? And the eternal word of God enjoys the bread of life, enjoys bread and milk with his friend. And that's kind of a picture of grace. I don't know if you've heard the term grace in these terms, but if you were in England, you would understand this term maybe a little better. But in England, if you've been graced by someone, it's someone with a greater title who slows down long enough to speak to someone who's more common. So if the royals were passing by and they stopped to say hello to you, then you have been graced with their presence. Okay, in this itself, God stooping down, and we see a picture of this even in Philippians 2, verses 5. If you look 5 through 11, that God stooped down. There's this grace of God stooping down and having a meal with commoners. Okay, so it's kind of a picture of grace here. So think about, when was the last time that you recognized God's presence in just something that was ordinary? Maybe at your own table, maybe in your own home, maybe in your neighborhood, maybe in your work day, maybe through just a simple act of service. When were you just kind of doing something ordinary and then God kind of showed up? Maybe another question, this is our question for our table discussion, is what is your Mamre, your oaks of Mamre? All right, so I want you to think about that, and that'll be at the end. But I mean, I have a Mamre. I have an Oaks of Mamre place that I enjoy. It's down in Chester County. I've probably mentioned this before, but it's the land of my fathers. I mean, my grandfather bought this farm during the Depression when everybody else was going broke. For some reason, he was able to buy land. And it's the place that I grew up on. It's got a beautiful government watershed lake on that place. And somewhere when I was 17 or 18 years old, and in the back of a 79 El Camino, not doing what you think I may have been doing, but I fell in love with my wife, right? And we were just looking at the stars and talking, and there was some connection that fired off that hasn't stopped. The first camping trip that I ever took was with my boys when they were 2 and 3 years old in the same place. And the most recent one was back in October, and they're 35 and 33. So 30 years later, that's happened. My oldest one's wife knew that she loved him at this same location. My youngest one proposed to his wife in the same location. And even though it's just dirt, it's just a place, okay? There's a rhythm of communion that takes place with me when I go there. And guys, a lot of times I just go there to fish. I just go there to hunt deer. I just go there to walk or ride my four-wheeler. I mean, sometimes that's my only purpose in going there. But there is a rhythm of communion and fellowship that takes place, and sometimes God just shows up. Sometimes God shows up and speaks in those moments because I've put myself in that space. Now, it doesn't have to be outside. It could be your chair that you sit in to have a quiet time every morning. But that's the question a little bit later on, is what is your Oaks of Mamre? What is that special place that enters into that rhythm of communion that you may have with the Lord? So sometimes, and we learn this from this first section here, is the most spiritual thing you can do is just go to the door. Just open your tent flap and be willing to say, come on in. Let's sit down and have a conversation. All right, so let's look at this next section here, verses 9 through 15. Okay, and in verse 9 it says, they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, well, she's in the tent. And the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him, and Abraham and Sarah were old and advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah, so Sarah laughed to herself, saying, am I worn out? My Lord is old, and shall I have pleasure? And the Lord said to Abraham, did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? And at the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, oh, no, but you did laugh. I love that encounter. We're going to get to that in just a second. So we see that the meal is wrapping up. Abraham is still kind of standing nearby. He's watchful. He's just paying attention to what's going on with his guests. He's attentive. But now this conversation turns to Sarah. And in chapter 17, the covenant promise that we saw was, something that God spoke to Abraham. And the sign of circumcision was all about the fellas, okay? But now this conversation shifts and it turns to Sarah, and it begins with, the Lord saying, where is Sarah, your wife? Okay, now he's not asking because he doesn't know where she is. Okay, this is a question that he already knows the answer to. What he's doing is that he's inviting her into the conversation. And it's now her turn to hear this covenant promise maybe more directly. So where is she? She's in the tent. She's listening from a distance. She's eavesdropping, right? She's dropping those eaves. And she's hidden and she's hesitant and reluctant, but she's paying attention, right? So the word says that she's listening here. It implies just a really careful attention. And her heart is probably doubtful, but she's leaning in and she's still tuned into the conversation. And guys, sometimes the first step of faith is simply putting yourself in a place where you're going to overhear what God's saying. I mean, have you ever gone to a retreat or an advance, or you've gone to just gone to church, and really you knew going in you weren't expecting anything, and shame on us for doing that sometimes, what we do. But then all of a sudden God just drops a bomb. Right? I mean, there's just something that you weren't expecting to pick up or to take away. And all of a sudden, just because you were there, okay, God speaks. And there's something that grabs a hold of your heart in that. And you walk away from that going, I almost didn't come. I am so glad that I showed up for this. And Sarah's in this position. She's just kind of dialed in. She's listening, okay? But I love what this says. I mean, it points out how old they were. And it says the way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. Now, I don't think that we need to be a medical professional to know what that means, right? So her menstrual cycle had stopped. Biologically, her window had closed. She knows, everybody knows, that she's just not capable of bearing children at the age that she is, right? But then she goes on and she says, Abraham's old and I'm all worn out. And do you notice the question that she has? Shall I experience pleasure? Is that even possible for me to enjoy sex? That's exactly what she's talking about. So she's not just talking about, is it possible for me to conceive? But just the thought of even being together sexually at that point was ridiculous to her. Is that even possible? It's kind of what she's saying. And this is maybe a part of her laughter that comes in the middle of all this. And it's maybe too just the sound of a heart trying to protect itself from disappointment. Because, she's heard this promise before, or she's heard about this promise before, and nothing happened. So she's laughing it off. She's saying, I've kind of heard this promise before, and last time it was about 13 years ago, and that's how we got Ishmael, but it wasn't through me. And then, she backs up maybe even further than that. And I've heard this has been a legend for a long time. And so she laughs about it, right? So it's kind of half disbelief, but then also half longing, maybe even that part of her that's just kind of saying, really, God? Now? Why now, right? And I think if we were honest, the thing that we probably say, we've probably all done that too. There is something that maybe we had hoped for and something that maybe we hoped would develop in our life. And then when it does, we're like, really, God? Now this is when this is showing up? This is when this opportunity comes up? This is when you want to use me in this kind of way? And this is kind of where she's going with this. So in verse 13, The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old? And at the appointed time, I'm going to return to you. And this time next year, she's going to have a son. So same spot, same place, same location. This time next year, there's going to be a baby, right? And then he asked this question, is anything too hard for the Lord? And guys, this is probably the hinge of the whole chapter. This is where it all pivots. It's this question that carries us from Genesis to the Gospels. That this, you kind of come to this question of, from Sarah's tent to Mary's manger. How can this happen? You get into the statement that Jesus makes. Is it possible for a camel to pass through the eye of the needle? Nothing's impossible with God. In Luke 1:37, it kind of says it directly, for nothing will be impossible with God, right? So there's this statement that the Lord makes in all of this, and this is kind of the sign of Christology in Genesis, this power to create life where there is none. We see this happening even with Mary in the birth of Jesus. And you notice the tenderness here? I mean, God doesn't rebuke Sarah in her unbelief. He reminds her. Right? He speaks faith back into her unbelief. And that's kind of how grace works sometimes. It doesn't necessarily shame you for laughing or for having doubt, but it invites you to trust again. And this is what the Lord's doing with Sarah. But Sarah in verse 15 denied it. She said, I didn't laugh, for she was afraid. And I love the exchange here. God doesn't argue with her. He just tells her the truth gently, and just come back and says, oh, no, but you did laugh, right? And he's not exposing her, but he's inviting her, right? So by the next chapter, we see that laughter become joy when Isaac is born. And that whole reminder, every time they call his name, because his name means he laughs, means laughter. It's a reminder of this promise and the moment where Sarah laughed, and then in chapter 17, Abraham had laughed. So Sarah wasn't alone in all of that. So it goes from kind of a cynical laughter to more of a worshipful laughter by the time Isaac is born. So think about what your Sarah moment might be, that place in your life. And we talked about this at our table last week. What's been something that God's either done or that you've counted on him to do that's just laughable, where you thought to yourself, it's too late. That's never going to be something that changes. Maybe that's something you're even faced with right now. It might be a broken relationship. It might be a marriage that's gone cold. It might be your own spiritual life. But what is it in your life that just seems laughable, that there's no way that God could show up and do this? God's kind of in the business of doing that. He kind of likes taking our hearts that have kind of been resigned and thrilling us in some ways that bring blessing. All right. So God still visits tents. Okay. He still visits tents, still shows up in the ordinary, and still, brings promises that may sound impossible. And that's kind of a part of how he reminds us of who he is. All right. So next, we're going to see kind of a shift in the story here. So let's look at chapter 18, verse 16, and let's read down through 21. So the men set out from there, and they looked towards Sodom. And Abraham went with them to set them on their way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Seeing that Abraham surely shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed by him. For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring Abraham to what he has promised him. And then the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have come together, or what they have done altogether, according to their outcry that has come to me. And if not, then I will know. All right. So we see this shift of tone. The meal is ended. The promise has been spoken. And God and these two other visitors stand up to leave, and Abraham starts walking with them. And it shifts from this personal blessing to really kind of a global concern. There's something going on somewhere else that's a part of their mission that they're going to give some attention to. And Abraham moves from receiving God's promise to being a partner in the covenant, and how God winds up in some ways, we see God deliberating whether he's going to confide in Abraham and let him know what's going on or not. Now, one of the things that I kind of got stumped on here, and I had to dig a little deeper, is why in the world, what's going on here? I mean, has God not made up his mind? Is he just like, he doesn't know what he's going to do, so he's wanting to decide whether Abraham knows the lay of the land better than is going to give him good intel, or why is this, okay? Now, I think it's about more than that. I think what God is doing, he's kind of thinking out loud here and just asking himself the question, okay, Abraham so far has been a hard one to convince even of blessing. Okay, if I'm going to bless him, it's been hard for Abraham to really even believe that and to continue to choose my sufficiency and my plan A. So now that he's finally wrapped his brain maybe around blessing, is he ready? Is there a maturity level there for Abraham that puts him in a position where he's able to handle justice? So he understands the blessing side of me, but can he now wrap his mind around the God who is not just the God of blessing and the promise, but also the God of justice? So after deliberating with himself about this, he chooses to share his plans with Abraham. And what this puts Abraham in a position of is not just a follower anymore, but he's a covenant partner, he's a friend. Wenham is a commentator, and he says this: to reveal his plans is to treat Abraham as a covenant partner and not just a subject. All right. So this is something the Bible Project talks about too. Is kind of this defining feature of biblical faith is partnership with God. That God doesn't just act for Abraham, but he acts with him. And you think about this, for us guys, I mean, we have a level of faith where we ask God to bless us, but there's a different level of faith when we ask God to use us, right? And there's that's a sign of growth. That's a sign that we are maturing. Okay, verse 18, it says that, seeing that Abraham is surely going to become this great mighty nation, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed in him. I've chosen him that he may command his children and his household to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he's promised him. But then we see this other phrase, and this is what kind of clues us into what God's thinking was, is that Abraham has understood blessing, but now there's this other part I'm revealing to him, and that's righteousness and justice. Okay? Now, guys, when we look at this, the word righteous means, the Hebrew is tzedakah is the term, and it refers to what is right and fair. Mishpat is the word for justice, and it has to do with like legal decisions and that are both condemning the guilty but also acquitting the innocent. So there is a judgment component to that God is going to decide. Are there some that I'll acquit, or are there some that I'm going to condemn in all of this? And the justice and righteousness is kind of the heartbeat of God's covenant. Dr. Constable is somebody I like to look at sometimes too, and he said that the people of God are called not only to faith, but to embody God's character, righteousness in relationship, and justice in action. And when you consider these terms, okay, there's grace, okay, but a part of embodying grace, a part of living out grace, means working in tandem with righteousness and justice. So that in us living out our lives, there's going to be signs of righteousness, and there's going to be a passion for justice that we have if we're embodying the character of God and who he is. That is something that winds up being an expression of faith. So God blesses us not to hoard grace, but to extend it in some ways. It's something that's been afforded to us, so we become that to other people. In verse 20, it says, then the Lord said that because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, then I'm going to know. All right. So the word outcry means just the cry of the oppressed, and there's some courtroom language that goes here. If injustice is something that's reached heaven's ears, then God's going to go down and he's going to investigate. Wenham says that God goes down. It's not because he lacks knowledge, but he's modeling perfect justice. Now, is there a time that's in our study so far that we've seen him do this before? When did God do this before? There was an outcry that he had heard that had reached his ears in heaven, and he goes down to investigate. When was that? Where? Egypt. Well, no. It was Babel. Okay, remember in the story of Babel, God goes down and he investigates. Now, guys, that matters, okay? Because a lot of times, we think about, well, how could God, judge these people, right? How could God, like in the Joshua Crusades or before Noah or, in the Tower of Babel, I mean, how could God do this? Is God reckless? No, it's kind of giving us this idea that God's never reckless in his judgment. He's always intentional. He's always taking everything into consideration, and his verdict is something that's rooted in compassion and in truth, right? Okay, so in verse 22, so the men turned from there and they went towards Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. I want to kind of wrap up with this. I'm not going to go through all of the negotiation that you see toward the end of the chapter there. Go back and read that sometimes, but it's where Abraham is negotiating with God about whether it's 50 or 40 or 30 or 20 or 10. You kind of get into that. But I just kind of want to wrap up with this because this is maybe one of the most powerful scriptures in all of sentences in all of Scripture. So they're walking away from the feast, okay, and the other two kind of walk on, and Abraham and the Lord have this conversation, and the Lord confides in him, and he tells him what he's about to do. This is the conversation, and then it says that Abraham still stood before the Lord. Abraham still stood before the Lord. Everybody else walks away, but Abraham stays. And there is this picture that we have of intercession here. That Abraham is and we see as it unfolds, that he's interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah. But what about 50? What about 40? What about 30? What about 20? Right? But here's the thing that I don't want you to miss. This intercession is the overflow of a relationship that's growing and maturing and developing that he has with God in the present, in the flesh, in this particular case. So guys, have you ever gone to, somebody says, hey, pray for me or pray for my son or my daughter or my mom or whoever it is. And you go and you sit down, okay, I'm going to pray for you. And you go and you sit down and you pray. And you just feel like nothing happens. You just feel like, I'm just talking to the ceiling. That's all that's happening here. So here's the key, okay? Before we intercede, we have to be in the presence of God, right? Before we're able to have an effective prayer, we have to foster that relationship. And if you go to stand before God for others and you haven't stood before him yourself, then sometimes those prayers may feel really empty. And I'm not saying that don't pray, but I'm saying when you go to intercede for other people, nurture and foster and allow God to nurture and foster that relationship that he has with you. Right? So I want to pull up and stop there just for the sake of time this morning and give you some chances to talk a little bit about what's been your Oaks of Mamre. Where has that been for you? Is it a place? Is it a moment? Is it an experience? A way of doing things that you do? I think about Psalm 63, and David had his place too, right? And Psalm 63 starts off by just saying, oh God, you are my God, but where in the world are you in this dry and thirsty land where there is no water? And he's going to God with this lament, this complaint, and there's plenty of reasons that he probably has for this, but he's pouring out his heart to God, and then he begins reviewing those rhythms that he's had of communion and fellowship with him, his Oaks of Mamre. He says, I've seen you in the sanctuary. I've seen you in the night watches. Where has God visited you? Where have you visited with God in a way that it was just an ordinary place and an ordinary moment, but yet God shows up and he speaks and he becomes God to you in that moment. So that's the question about the Oaks of Mamre. Take that and talk about that at your tables, and the action music is going to play next week as we look at Sodom and Gomorrah. All right? See you then.